Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 2018 John Ring LaMontagne Memorial Lecture. Today we honor the memory of and contribution of my dear friend and colleague, Dr. John LaMontagne, who joined NIAID in 1976 as the Institute's first influenza program officer. John's success at drawing attention to influenza, an understudied infectious disease at that time, exemplified his skill at marshaling international research efforts to a range of critical global health issues, including malaria, tuberculosis, and HIV/AIDS. John held various positions in NIAID's Division of Microbiology and Infectious Diseases and rose to become division director for 11 years in 1998. I appointed him as my principal deputy director, a position he held until his untimely death in 2004. John is remembered fondly by all of us who knew him for his warmth, his scientific vision, and his dedication to global health research, as well as his breadth of research interests. We're particularly pleased this afternoon to have with us in the audience John's wife, Elaine LaMontagne. Thank you for being here, Elaine. So our speaker today, Dr. David Morons, has similarly wide-ranging interests. A Detroit native, David received his undergraduate and medical degrees from the University of Michigan and completed his residency in pediatrics at the University of Hawaii in Honolulu and the University of Michigan Medical Center in Ann Arbor. In 1976, David joined CDC's Epidemic Intelligence Service. Remarkably, in that year alone, he became directly involved in investigating 3 emerging diseases: Legionnaire's disease, Ebola virus disease, and swine flu. A few years later, David helped investigate the first cases of a mysterious new disease that came to be known as AIDS. He also spent 2 years as a medical officer with the CDC Lassa Fever Research Project in Sierra Leone. And between 1982 and 1998, David was on the faculty of the University of Hawaii. He joined us here at NIAID in 1998 as a medical officer and is currently one of my senior advisors. David has a long-standing interest in the history of public health and medicine, as evidenced by his extraordinary list of publications, which spans great breadth both geographically and chronologically. He's written about the plague of Athens of 430 BC, the birth of epidemiology during the 1832 Paris cholera epidemic, and the 1875 measles epidemic that killed 40,000 Fiji Islanders and sparked a rebellion among British colonialists. His contributions have not, however, been limited to improving our understanding of historical outbreaks. Recently, for example, he's played a role in shaping our Institute's response to the arrival in the Western Hemisphere of both chikungunya and Zika viruses. Influenza, the topic of today's lecture, has long captured David's interest. He has authored or co-authored dozens and dozens of papers in the field, including a 2010 publication that traced the first recognition of pandemic flu back to 1510. Writing with Drs. Jeff Taubenberger and Johan Hulten, David placed the 2005 reconstruction of the 1918 pandemic virus into its historical context, while a 2006 paper, also co-written with Dr. Taubenberger, showed how the 1918 virus could be said to be the mother of all pandemics. This year marks the centennial of the pandemic caused by that notorious mother virus, and her unruly lineage persists to this day. And perhaps no one in the world is more qualified than David to help us explore how we can prepare for the second century of descendants of this 1918 pandemic virus. So please join me in welcoming Dr. David Morons.
Thank you, Tony, and thank you, all of you, for coming here today. It's a great honor to be able to speak about a subject that John loved in a talk in John's honor. So I'm going to say a little bit about John, but for those of you who may not have known John, go to our website and you can read a much longer story of John's life and his career here, and also at University of Texas, Austin. This is my favorite photo of John. He was a great friend, and he, as Tony said, he is still missed 14 years after his untimely death. Now, in saying a few words about John, I want to take us all the way back to the year 1976. As Tony mentioned, that's when John came to NIH as the first influenza program officer. It's also the year that I went to CDC, and it was a pretty interesting year. There were all these bad epidemics. It was a really bad year for bad diseases. It was also the bicentennial year, the year of women, and in the upper northwest corner, the year of the first Apple computer. Hard to believe. This was before it was white. Even then, although I didn't know John in 1976, even then our paths were converging. We both walked into the middle of something that's now called the Swine Flu Affair. And as I said, John was the first program officer in NIAID, and he immediately had to deal with the Swine Flu Affair, which, for those who don't know what it is, there was an outbreak of influenza that began in Fort Dix, New Jersey, and it was traced to a virus that was identified as a swine virus, a pig virus, and it was very much like the 1918 virus in some of its genetic and phenotypic aspects, and it was believed at the time by almost everybody in public health that this could be the return of the deadly 1918 pandemic. It turned out it wasn't. But in the meantime, the United States had geared up in a massive vaccine campaign. 45 million doses of vaccine were given, but the pandemic never came, and worse yet, 450 people developed a neurologic complication of the vaccine, or allegedly related to the vaccine. Nobody really knows for sure what happened, called Guillain-Barré syndrome. And that shut down the vaccination campaign. There was a big government investigation, a report that you see on the left, authored by a young man who later we all came to know when he was the head of the Institute of Medicine. And Dr. Sensor, David Sensor, the director of CDC, was fired by the secretary of what's now HHS, then Health, Education, and Welfare. It wasn't until 1990, although I met John and knew John in the interim, it wasn't until 1998 when our paths finally crossed, when he recruited me to come here, and multiple telephone calls and a few in-person visits over the course of 6 or 12 months, telling me how wonderful NIAID was. Of course, I knew that. I'd been working with NIAID even back when I was at CDC. But he finally got me to come here, and I'm very glad I did. It was the best decision I ever made, and we were thrown immediately into all sorts of new problems, like rotoshield and intussusception, which was the subject of Al Kapikian's Kenyon lecture some years back. And cowboy boots. What does cowboy boots have to do with this? One of my best memories of John was when he and I and maybe some others traveled to Austin, Texas for some kind of meeting. I don't remember what, but I had never owned a pair of cowboy boots. And I had an afternoon off, and John recommended some place to go to buy cowboy boots. I think it was Allen's boot store or something. I remember I had to cross a bridge, which was either over a river or a very big arroyo, and I brought these cowboy boots. And there they are in the picture. I have them with me today. I would be wearing them, except I'd be out of uniform, and the Surgeon General would probably fire me. But I'm going to put them on as soon as this talk is over. Okay, now let's talk about flu, John's favorite subject, or at least one of his favorite subjects. I think we all know what flu is. It's a really bad disease. When you get it, you feel like you've been run over by a train, and it's one of the major killers of human beings. So, now this is supposed to be a movie that has to be run from upstairs. Can we run it? There we go. So influenza is a viral disease which is spread in 3 different ways: by aerosol droplet, which is very, very small particles, too small to see; by bigger droplets, which is what you're seeing here; and also by fomites and by hand, that is contact spread. Influenza has actually been around, as Dr. Fauci mentioned, for at least 500 years, and it's been coming back in repeated pandemics at unpredictable intervals, and the symptoms are exactly the same today as they were 500 years ago. We all know them: fever, headache, muscle aches, feeling like you're lousy, wanting to be in bed. And deaths in all pandemics that have been recognized, deaths occur predominantly in the very young, the very old, and in pregnant women. The 1918 pandemic, the subject of what I'm going to talk about the rest of my talk, was the most fatal event in human history, exceeding the number of deaths in the Black Death in the of the 14th century. In the United States, it killed an estimated 675,000 people. Globally, 50 or 100 million is the accepted estimate, and most of this was within a period of just a few months. And recent research suggests that the death count could be even higher. There are new data coming out from investigators, such as Dr. Siddharth Chandra, this is Sri Lanka, in which they measure population growth trends over time before and after the year of 1918. And they've done this for 5 or 6 different countries in the developing world where there were never very good vital statistics data. And they're coming up everywhere they go with higher estimates of deaths in 1918. So I imagine that over time, the estimates of the number of people who died in 1918 are likely to go up. In the United States, unbelievably, in that 1 year alone, life expectancy dropped 12 years just from the pandemic. Before I get into the science, I think because this was such a terrible human tragedy, I want to just spend about a minute thinking about what life must have been like in 1918 when everybody was dying around you. And here are some images, a few images that are from 1918 and 1919 that give us some idea of what life must have been like during that deadly pandemic. And of course, most tragic of all is the deaths of millions of children and millions more who became orphans during that time. The 1918 pandemic was mysterious in many different ways. I'll talk about these points that you see here. The recurrence in waves, the unexpectedly high mortality at all ages, the paradoxical mortality pattern referred to as the W-shaped curve. We'll see that in a minute. It is something that was never seen before and has never been seen since. And deaths from severe bacterial bronchopneumonia. There are also some canards that I'll touch on. Now, those of you who know French know that canard is a French word for duck, which is important. We'll see why in a minute. But in English, canard means something that is said to be so but may not be so, or at least may not be fully true, such as what you see here. The herald wave idea, and I'm using herald wave in the old sense. Nowadays, people mean it to be something different. That the pandemic, some say, was caused by the disruptions of World War I, or that people didn't even suspect what the cause was. And in fact, they actually did. So where did the virus come from? Thanks to my colleague, Jeff Taubenberger, who is somewhere here in the audience, I hope. There he is, Jeff Taubenberger. Jeff is the guy who found the holy grail of infectious disease, at least virology, in discovering, quote unquote, discovering the 1918 virus, which is to say being able to sequence and stitch together the RNA fragments of the virus, not just one virus, but in whole or in part several different viruses spanning an interval of 1918 and 1919, and therefore identify it genetically so it could be reconstructed and studied. This is a huge accomplishment done by Jeff and by Jeff's laboratory team, and with the help of Johan Holten, who assisted in exhuming a body buried in Brevig Mission, Alaska, from which viral RNA was taken and showed the virus in a human being rather than in a the other specimens were from pathology slides. What we found, what Jeff found, and what science learned, was that this was a bird-like virus, a wild waterfowl-like virus, and the genetic changes that were identified led to the conclusion that this virus had been a bird virus in birds not very long before 1918. But what kind of bird? This is a test. Was the 1918 mother of all pandemics a mother hen? No, actually not. It's not a poultry virus. It doesn't have evidence of having been in a chicken or a turkey. It's perhaps a mother goose, a virus that had been in wild waterfowl, goose, geese, ducks, and so on. Now, why is that important? Because all influenza A viruses are descended from, either are or are descended from viruses that exist in a reservoir of billions of wild birds all over the world. And these are infecting birds enterically. They're spread into the water. The influenza virus doesn't exist as stable viruses for very long in the wild in birds because the 8 genes are always reassorting. They're shaking and baking, mixing and matching. It's only when one of these bird virus gets out into an unnatural host, a human, a mammal, even a chicken, that it can be passed on as a stable virus. Let's look first at the progress of the pandemic in the United States. And we're going to see the spread of the virus over 5 weeks, beginning in September 1918. And this is the bluest blue states I've ever seen, I think. But they're going to turn red in a minute as the pandemic appears first on the East Coast and also on the West Coast. There we see the week 1. We see a number of cities and areas in the United States. Note the East Coast, but note also the 3 major California cities and other cities as well, which tend to be either large cities like Chicago, you can see Chicago and Cleveland, and you can also see some that are near large cities in other states as well. Now, we're going to go to week 2. Stay focused on the Northeast because that's the only place where things are happening. Spreading a little more in the Northeast. Week 3. Now it's spreading into the interior, and it's up all over the Gulf Coast. Week 4. It still hasn't gotten to Haskell, Kansas, the reputed home of the pandemic, according to some historians. But it's clearly in all the populous areas in the United States. And by week 5, the whole United States. This is how quickly it went through. Now let's look at the world. We're going to go back a little bit, and what I'm going to show you is the progress over a period of 1.5 years in the world. And let's recognize that we're looking at places with significant excess mortality, but we have no way of knowing, early on at least, that this was the 1918 flu, as opposed to the pneumonia and the flu that happens every year in the winter, no matter what the virus is. But never mind that. I've just put this together, and let's just see. In February 1918, we see there's significant excess mortality in 2 Chinese cities, in Hong Kong and in Shanghai. Jump forward 4 months to June. We see that it's in 2 large cities, Jakarta and Mumbai. And also there are excess mortality in northern Germany. Germany was at war, of course, and in Labrador. July. Now it's appeared in other big cities near the equator, but also in northern cities. And if I had filled them all in, all the Scandinavian countries, Denmark and Lithuania, Latvia, all of the northern European countries were involved in July. In August, we have Japan. In September, this is the big wave. Almost every place in the world had become involved in or by September. And if they didn't, most of those places became involved by October of 1918. And then in November, a few small islands and a few remote places were straggling. And the last straggler was Australia, which in which the flu appeared in Sydney in March 1919, in Adelaide in April 1919, in Queensland in May 1919, and then in August in Perth. Now let's talk about influenza waves, the W I mentioned earlier, and a lot of other weird behavioral aspects of this pandemic. First of all, how many waves were there in a given place? Well, the answer is there was one. Or there was two. Or there was three. This is London. Or there was six. This is Wrocław, which is now in Poland. And then we had very weird things like in Hawaii. This is Hawaii, the then territory of Hawaii. In 1918, in the spring and, in the summer, late summer and fall, there was a huge epidemic. The morbidity was enormous, but the mortality was very low. You can see a little bump down in 1918. Just a little bump, not much death. Lots of cases of flu. This is when the whole world was experiencing high death rates. Hawaii had a small bump. And then the flu came back the next year in 1919, and there was a little bigger bump. And then a huge epidemic in 1920, more than 2 years later. Nobody knows why. Just another aspect of the very strange behavior of this virus. This is a busy set of slides only for geeky scientists, but I'll try to walk everybody through it. What we're looking at now is all of the military put together, the United States military in camps in the United States, the admissions for influenza over time. On the bottom, on the x-axis, we see time, and we can see, of course, we just mentioned the United States and all the military camps had this big pandemic wave in September and October 1918. But there was something going on here, and some people say there was a spring wave. What was this? Was this an early appearance of the virus? And if so, why didn't it become pandemic then? And why did it hardly kill anybody then? Now, I want you to ignore this y-axis here. We're going to be looking at this different y-axis over here, which maps deaths. And this is on a 3-cycle log scale. What that means is that the 3-cycle log scale makes little tiny stuff at the bottom look huge. It's sort of blown up. And we see these are deaths from people who were admitted with influenza and died of either a diagnosis of influenza or pneumonia, and that's going to be mostly lobar pneumonia. Now we see another curve of people admitted with influenza who died of bronchopneumonia, influenza and bronchopneumonia. And if we superimpose them, we notice something kind of strange, that whatever this spring wave was, whatever this spring event was, it wasn't causing bronchopneumonia, very much of it at least, the classical way in which influenza kills you, and it wasn't causing much mortality at all. Remember, this is blown up a lot. It looks huge. But if we were on a linear scale like this would be a little dot down here. It wouldn't be blown up like it was. So whatever was happening in the spring, at least in the Army camps, had a little bit of fatality, but it didn't have any of the hallmarks of the 1918 flu. As with most infectious diseases, the poor and the disadvantaged were more likely to become ill and more likely to die. Not surprising, but nonetheless tragic. If we look at the epidemiology, we see this is 3 different things. This is the morbidity. That is the getting sick of it. Age on the x-axis and incidence or attack rate on the y-axis. And what we see is 2 little bumps. You see these in all influenza pandemics. A bump of influenza in school-aged children, and a bump in working-age adults who, in this era, were almost all parents and had little kids in their house. Next down, we see the famous W, mortality curves tend to, for influenza almost always, before and since always, have been in the very young and the very old and low mortality in between. It's the same thing for case fatality down here. This would be a U-shaped curve of normal case fatality, and I didn't draw it in here of mortality just to make it look less busy. But I think you can see there's a W in 1918 for both mortality and for case mortality. And this is a comparison from 10 years later, 1928 and 1929. So this W has never been explained satisfactorily, and it's one of the great mysteries. But it even gets more mysterious. Let's look at what happens to the W-shaped mortality curve over time in Wrocław, Poland. This is the big wave in October 1918, mostly. It comes back a year later. You see a big W, a big hump in the middle. And when it comes back the next year, that hump has gotten smaller. And when it comes back the year after that, it's gone entirely. The W, whatever it is, went away with recurrence of the pandemic, presumably the same virus. So is something happening to the virus? Well, let's look at Hawaii. Remember, Hawaii had the 3 pandemic occurrences in 1918, 19, and 20. This is 1917 as a background, not much going on. There's a very low number of deaths from influenza, and those deaths are almost all in the very young, infants and the very old. Now we have the big 1918 epidemic in Hawaii, and again, very young, the very old. There's almost no mortality in young adults that make up the W, and if there's a W there at all, it's pretty unnoticeable. Then in 1919, of course, it came back, and now we're beginning to see a few more deaths in adults, young adults. And in 1920, that third wave, now there's the beginning to be the appearance of a W. So the W giveth and the W taketh away. It appears and it goes away, and nobody can figure out why. And people have been scratching their heads about this for 100 years. And it was, I should say, just let me go back a little bit. This is 1921 to show that whatever W there might have been in 1920, it's gone forever after. Another strange thing about 1918 was the supposed deaths from an unusual clinical picture, which was called at the time Heliotrope Cyanosis. And this is a drawing by a medical illustrator of how people died with this bluish coloration of the lips and the earlobes and other parts of the face that presumably reflects suffocation. The lungs are drowning in fluid. There's not oxygen getting in. And it may well have been seen in previous pandemics, but certainly it was said to be characteristic of this. And here we see a drawing and a photograph of the cyanotic hands in the 1918 influenza. One of the important things we've learned, and Dr. Taubenberger and Dr. Fauci and I and others were among the first to really draw attention to this about 10 years ago, was that in 1918, hardly anybody died of influenza. They died of secondary bacterial pneumonia. You got influenza, and somehow through some mechanism, and I'm not going to go into what that is, but we can talk about it if anybody's interested, people who got influenza were much more likely, hundreds-fold more likely, to get bacterial pneumonia from standard bacteria that are in the nose and throat of people all the time: pneumococcus, streptococcus, and staphylococcus aureus, and a number of others. And what we're looking at here is not a Jackson Pollock painting, but these are pathology specimens stained with the standard stain, hematoxylin and eosin, and we see bronchi filled with white blood cells. We see alveoli, the air sacs in the lungs, infected and damaged. And it's easy to imagine, for a pathologist at least, looking at these, that the person who these lungs came from would, there was a reason they were dead, and the reason was to be found in the lungs. As I mentioned, this is a paper that I worked with Dr. Fauci and Dr. Taubenberger, in which we looked at 58 recut pathology specimens from 1918 and also reviewed over 8,000 autopsies that had been published around the time of 1918 and after, in which bacterial cultures were done. And what we found was that, in analyzing all these data together, were that about 96% of all these autopsies, they were able to culture pneumopathogens, mostly staph, strep, and pneumococcus from the lungs. In 80%, pleural fluids contained those same bugs, and in 70%, blood cultures were positive. So people were dying with massive pneumonia, with empyema, and with bacteremia or septicemia. But there's another interesting epidemiologic aspect to these deaths, and this is, again, a little bit hard to think about. It's a busy slide. But I want to draw your attention on just to this one blue line here, the light blue line. And I want to make the point that this line, which is pneumonia case fatality, is just about parallel. It's just about even between the ages of 25 and 55, the ages which everybody was dying. Whereas, I'm going to drop that line out now and we'll see what's left. We have influenza case fatality and the percentage of cases complicated by pneumonia. To turn this into English, what this says is that the mortality of influenza in 1918 is determined primarily by the incidence of complicating bacterial pneumonia. In other words, it was not true that those people who died had more severe pneumonia. It's just that they were more likely to get pneumonia once they had influenza. But believe it or not, there were so-called influenza vaccines in 1918, 15 years before the virus was discovered. They weren't really influenza vaccines, although they were called that. They were actually vaccines which were made from crude preparations of bacteria that had been inactivated, killed. And they were given all over the world to civilians and to military alike. There were hundreds, God knows how many vaccines there were. They were, kind of homemade concoctions of inactivated stuff. Most of them had pneumococcus in them. Many had streptococcus and Bacillus influenzae, now called Haemophilus influenzae, and various other things. And you would think these vaccines would not be likely to work. But what we found when we did, this is done with Keith Klugman and his graduate student. Keith is now at the Gates Foundation. He heads the pneumococcus initiative there at Gates. What we found by doing meta-analyses of published studies in civilians and in the military, and looking at the relative risks of getting pneumonia or dying of pneumonia when you had influenza after getting the vaccine or not getting the vaccine, that these vaccines actually worked, and significantly so. Now it's time to talk about the mother's children, the children being the pandemic viruses that have come after 1918, and there are a number of them. There was 1957, we had a pandemic called H2N2. We'll see it a little more in a minute. 1968. In 1977, the old 1918 virus came out of a freezer, or a descendant rather of it, came out of a freezer, perhaps by an accident with a clinical trial, and got loose in the world again. And then in 2009, of course, we had the so-called swine flu pandemic. And each of these subsequent pandemics caused substantial death, although diminishing over time, fortunately, and maybe by coincidence. In the United States, we had, as I mentioned, 675,000 deaths in 1918, 70,000 in 1957 with the Asian flu pandemic, 30,000 in 1968 with the Hong Kong flu, and about 12,000 in 2009. Let's look at the bottom of this busy slide here. And what we're looking at is influenza mortality beginning in about 1955 going through today. And we see the four pandemic eras, the H2N2 era that began in 1957 and ended in 1967, the H3N2 era, which began in 1968 and is still going on, and then the return of the H1N1. These hatched colors mean that we have the two different viruses, the old H1N1 virus and the H3N2 virus together. And then finally out here, since 2009, the new pandemic 2009 virus plus H3N2. And substantial mortality, particularly back here, but still a lot of mortality throughout intervening years. Of course, year to year it varies. Now, if we look up here, the colors are the same. And what we're looking at here is every time you go up a step on, think of it as going up a step on a ladder, on a stairway. Every time you go up a step here, the vaccine is changing year to year because there's been antigenic change. The vaccine has to change and a new formula is made. So this is a marker of viral evolution. And I think you can see that these viruses are evolving, but that H3N2 has been evolving at a dramatic rate, whereas the old H1N1 and the new H1N1 aren't evolving much at all, which has a lot of implications for vaccine development. And I should say also that there's multiple mechanisms of viral evolution. There's drift, which means mutation, which causes either new epitopes to appear, the virus getting around the population immunity, either new epitopes or new glycosylation sites. There's intrasubtypic reassortment, in which a hemagglutinin is replaced by a different flavor of a hemagglutinin of the same subtype. And of course, when there's a pandemic, there is shift. What have we done with all these challenges, with all these viruses? What have we been doing to try to prevent something like 1918 from coming back again? Well, we now have influenza vaccines. They're not all that good, but we're going to make them better, I think, as I'll say in a minute. We have antiviral drugs and more on the horizon, better ones on the horizon, third generations on the horizon. We have antibiotics that can treat virtually all the causes of bacterial pneumonia deaths. We have much better influenza diagnostics. Some can be used point of care at the bedside. Others can be used in clinics. And we have a really remarkable surveillance system for influenza. And I must say the United States surveillance system is the best in the world. CDC has about 5 major different mechanisms of surveillance. And in addition to the people they count with flu and with flu deaths, they actually encounter and do lab studies on about 1 million people a year. And that's how we get the information. Back here at NIAID, we've long had a very robust program of influenza countermeasures, research and development that is conducted by laboratories all around the world, as well as by some of our own scientists here at NIAID. And we're working on all these areas and also working with industry. I want to give a bit of a shout out to the NIH Library. In NIAID, we began this project called the Pandemic Influenza Digital Archives, which is essentially it'll be when it goes live in a matter of months, it will have thousands of publications from 1918 about the 1918 pandemic and many other related things as well, which will be accessible through lots of metadata, including geospatial metadata. This will be useful to researchers and school kids and the interested public, I think, around the world. And I want to also give a shout out to all the many scientists that are working on some of these big problems. And here you see some of our stars at NIAID. But in addition to them, we fund the best influenza researchers around the world. We, meaning DMID and other parts of NIAID and NIH. If you're a really great influenza researcher, you're probably being funded by us. And I think that, as we go forward with developing new and better vaccines, so-called universal vaccines, I think we're going to enter a new era of being able to control influenza. Now, the term universal influenza vaccine has been variously used for different purposes by different people, but at the very least, I think we would want a vaccine that can protect against all the new influenza viruses that might occur in a pandemic and the seasonal viruses as well. But before I bring this to a close, I want to think for a minute about what the world was like during the pandemic and imagine what it might have been like had the pandemic not occurred. The pandemic was one of the reasons that World War I ended. The Germans surrendered, in part, one of the generals admitted, because of all the illness and deaths from the flu, but also the illness that it caused, and our President Wilson and in others, perhaps prevented a successful conclusion in the Treaty of Versailles and in the ensuing years that might have prevented us from going into World War II. And many historians nowadays say that World War II was really the end of World War I. There was just a lull in the action for 20-some years in between. Here we see President Wilson and Lloyd George and the Kaiser and General Pershing. There's a lot of famous art that relates to 1918. On the top we see the novella by Katherine Ann Porter, a very famous book some of us had to read or wanted to read when we were kids in high school or college. And this is a true story. Katherine Ann Porter, one of the great literary giants of the last century, actually almost died of the flu. And her story in this book, which is a true story, is a tragic one. She had a fiancé who was a soldier, and he was on leave, and they were together. And she got influenza just about the time that he left to go back to his military assignment. And she was in the hospital for many months, unconscious and unaware. And when she finally came to months later, she learned that he had caught influenza a few days later after leaving her and died. And that's what the book is about. And then William Faulkner, another great writer, like many people, actually survived the 1918 flu because he was placed under quarantine in an aeronautics school in Toronto, and he never got it. On the left is Edvard Monk, the painter of the Scream. This is when he had something to really scream about, a self-portrait of him sitting in a chair recovering from the 1918 influenza. The French poet Guillaume Apollinaire, who survived a head wound in the war, came back only to die of the 1918 influenza. And one of my favorite writers, Thomas Wolfe, whose book Look Homeward Angel is an American classic, which in my day, every kid had to read it. I loved it. It's also a true story. And as in real life, Thomas Wolfe was the son of a gravestone cutter. And in the book, his brother dies of influenza in 1918, and the ghost of his brother comes back and is a central part of this story. And in fact, his real brother, Benjamin Harrison Wolfe, did die in 1918, did die of the flu. And I know the events in the book are accurate because I was able to obtain from the Wolfe people the death certificate of Benjamin, depicting, consistent with the death that was described in the book. Even American film stars died. Annette Selos is not really remembered today except for her Reuben sandwich, but she was a leading lady of Charlie Chaplin. And perhaps the most tragic death in 1918 is of Egon Schiele, who is not remembered today unless you're an art lover, but he was the most notorious and perhaps one of the greatest painters of his era, the era of Picasso. And I think it's fair to say that he was more famous even than Picasso and Braque at the time and others of this era. But in October 1918, he and his wife, then 6 months pregnant, got influenza at the same time. And they went into their apartment and lived for a few days, and they all three died together, almost together. He died last. And the last thing he did as he died was to sketch portraits of his dying wife. This photograph is his deathbed photo, which is taken by a Viennese photographer named Marta Fine. And Marta Fine was, the circumstances of the photo are not known. It's a professional photo. It's professionally lit. She did not get influenza, but Schiele, of course, died. And it's sort of ironic that 15 years later, Schiele's paintings were worth fortunes. And when the Nazis came in, they confiscated all the paintings they could find. Some of them have never been returned. They also confiscated Marta Fine and threw her in the Łódź ghetto in Poland. and she somehow survived the war. But of course, these are famous people. There's a lot of other people, not so famous, who are not individually remembered a century later. But I think it's worth remembering them because as biomedical scientists, we have to remember the 1918 pandemic. The reason is that something like it will happen again. One day, our population antibodies to these H1N1 viruses will wane or go away. But the genes and the viruses that cause them are still out there in wild birds. They'll be there 100 years from now. They'll always be ready to come back unless we find a way to stop them. It will happen again. Thinking about this past century of pandemic influenza caused by the mother of all pandemic viruses and her offspring, and working as we do here at NIAID to bring this pandemic era to an end, we realize that the past is never dead. As William Faulkner said, it's not even past. And as we look ahead, we have to also keep looking backward to remember, think, and trying to understand what happened in 1918 and what it is that we have to prevent. I want to end this by thanking so many folks listed here, Jeff Tubbenberger and his team, Julie Marquardt, who did the artwork that you saw on the poster, and much other work as well, Ann Opplinger, John and Aaron Weddle, who did some of these images, and of course Tony Fauci, who has been a stimulating colleague and boss for many years. It's helped me think about some of these things, and I thank all of you.
Maybe get the lights on and have any questions for that was fantastic, David.
Thank you
very much. That was really cool. Any questions or comments of David? All right. While they're thinking, let me ask a couple. So we've spoken about the pre-pandemics that we keep having to address, the H5N1, the H7N9, and when the 1918 pandemic came, it didn't, to our knowledge, linger around and infect a few people and then adapt itself a little bit more and more and more. So what's your opinion about the danger of something that's pre-pandemic like H7N9, which has been hanging around now for a long time? H5N1 has been since 1997. It still hasn't adapted itself to human. The chances of that happening versus something just coming out of nowhere the way 1918 came.
Well, it's an interesting question. I talk a lot about this with Jeff Taubenberger, and we don't necessarily 100% agree. But I think that wild bird viruses are always going to be a potential source of. When I say wild bird, I mean ducks and geese. I don't mean chickens. I think those are always a potential source, and they could come at any moment. I think the H2N2 virus, which caused the pandemic in 1957. And is still in freezers around the world, if that gets out, that'll probably cause a pandemic. But as far as these bird viruses go, I would never want to say they're not likely to cause a pandemic. But I would observe that these poultry viruses like H5N1 and H7N9, when they adapt to chickens, they go through complicated mutational pathways that perhaps make it more difficult to back adapt and get into a human being. So, anything's possible, but I'm not as worried as most people are about these chicken viruses causing a pandemic.
You took a long time to say that. I've been trying to coax you into saying that. Any other? Yes.
Hi, thank you for a wonderful talk. I'm interested in the digital library and whether there will be resources for genealogy and to see whether you have a lineage that died from influenza in the past.
There won't be there's no plans at this point for there to be any genealogical connections. But a lot of that you can do on Ancestry.com right now. The Pandemic Digital Archives is really related mostly to scientific publications. The geospatial stuff is built in because publications come from a certain place, describe a certain city or a certain neighborhood. But I don't think I can imagine any direct link with ancestry-type information.
Thanks for a great talk. Getting back to the 1918 pandemic, it seems if you look at the data, Philadelphia and San Francisco had really high mortality and case fatality. I think Philadelphia had something like 20,000 deaths between September and November. What do you chalk that up to? Is it just the social and behavioral facts, the infamous Bond parade in Philadelphia, or was the virus somehow different?
Well, I don't think the virus is different. I should say, I haven't said this, but the Taubenberger laboratory has sequenced a number of different viruses or their genes, hemagglutinin genes, spanning 10 months, and the virus is the same. There's no evidence that it's changing. So viral change is not a very likely thing. With respect to Philadelphia and other cities that were hard hit, two scientists, Marty Citron at CDC and Howard Markell at University of Michigan, have proposed that the higher death rates were associated with less robust public health actions, and those cities that had lower death rates had better public health. And you know, it's an interesting idea. I'm not convinced, just because I'm skeptical by nature about things like this, that cities who have better public health activities probably have better other stuff as well. And the better public health activities may be a marker for all sorts of things that can't easily be measured, crowding and other things. So I would say the returns are out. We don't really know what the answer to that is. But it's not viral, I'm sure.
Hello. So I've heard that there is little, if any, airborne transmission of influenza if humidity levels are above a certain level. I think that was based on research done with ferrets. And I was wondering, is that indeed the case? And if so, were there fewer deaths in parts of the world where the temperature is warmer and the humidity levels were higher back in 1918?
So yes, it is true that humidity, but two things that are climatic: humidity and heat inactivate influenza viruses. Humidity by thermal inactivation, temperature by thermal inactivation, and humidity by, when there's humidity, there are large droplets of water in the air. They merge with small droplet aerosols and they fall to the ground. So yes, that's true. I don't know that anybody's ever done a comparison to different parts of the world with different, humidity and temperature things. It's interesting that in Europe, the first real high-level mortality occurred in Northern Europe, where it's colder than in Southern Europe. So, for example, you had all of Scandinavia getting involved well before Italy and Southern France. But then, on the other hand, Mumbai and other Indian cities, which are not so far from the equator in the Northern Hemisphere, India had probably the worst fatality of all. So I think the way to look at it is the virus will get you eventually. And yes, every pandemic that occurs, it shuts down in the summer in temperate zones. 1957, when the H2N2 came, it got to the United States in the spring. It started to go gangbusters. Then the summer came and it just leveled off and went away. And then when the fall came, it came back again. So in the short term, these climatic things can impact or blunt a pandemic. But I think the pandemic will find you eventually. If it doesn't get you now, it'll get you next year.
Thanks.
Thanks, David. You want to say a word about how the Spanish got tagged with the blame?
Yeah, how did the Spanish get tagged with the blame? Well, it was World War I, and Spain was a neutral country. And most of the other countries in Europe were involved with the war, and if not combatants, were allies. And so they had restriction of the press. And so in Germany, you weren't likely to read about, the pandemic flu killing you. And the Allies and the Axis didn't want the other guys to know that their citizens were dying. But Spain didn't have a news blackout. And it was in all the Spanish newspapers that there was a flu outbreak in the spring or in March, late March, and in April. But this whole thing of blaming another country goes back to the 1889 pandemic. Everybody called it the Russian flu because it was first noticed in Russia. You got to blame somebody. It's just human nature. Yes.
Thank you again for a wonderful lecture. What do you think the impact of vaccines like Pneumovax, which prevent some bacterial pneumonias, might have on a future pandemic?
Well, I think, the whole Pneumovax story is an interesting one. And, the use of these vaccines on a large scale is being studied now, particularly by the Gates Foundation. And there's a lot of stuff that's been published about it. And I'm not really up on it, but I think Keith Klugman at Gates and the lady who he works with, whose name I'm blanking on at the moment, she's at Gates and is works with Keith on the pneumococcal vaccines. I think they're going to be looking at these things. Clearly it's going to be the case that pneumococcal vaccines prevent deaths from pneumonia in people who get flu. But I'm not sure how the data has all hung together yet. But you could bet. I'd be shocked, and you probably would too, if pneumococcal vaccines did not have an effect on people dying from influenza.
Thank you.
Dan?
Thank you, David. Could you comment on the so-called von Economos neurological disease, that perhaps there was a temporal association with the pandemic of 1918, 1919? Is there any evidence for a causal relationship?
So von Economos disease, or encephalitis lethargica, or sleeping sickness, was a pandemic that overlapped with the 1918 pandemic. And there has long been a belief that somehow the two were linked. Dr. Taubenberger has actually looked at brains of people who died of encephalitis lethargica to look for evidence of, a virus, a flu virus. Flu doesn't get into the brain, but of course he didn't find it. So I don't know the answer to that, but I would note a couple things. Encephalitis lethargica, the epidemic, the pandemic, began in 1916, 2 years before the 1918 flu, and it lasted until 1926, 10 years, at which time the 1918 flu was quiescent. And so the relationship is not clear, and you would speculate, but since you brought it up, I'm going to give you my theory, what it is. I think that in some studies of people, most people who got von Economos disease did not have a recent flu infection. That's clear. But of those who did, there's a lot of literature that suggests that if you got flu and got von Economos disease, it tended to be about 6 months later. So I think this could be a bacterial complication, and I would propose this, that people who got von Economos disease may have had flu. Their flu may have been complicated by streptococcal bacterial infection, and that this von Economos disease could be a streptococcal complication, as is Sydenham's chorea and the Pandas syndrome, which Dr. Swerdlow has worked on here at NIH and others. But it's just a theory.
Hi. I had to step out for a minute, so apologies if you already mentioned this, but I'm wondering if you'd heard of the hypothesis that overtreatment with aspirin was a contributory factor to mortality, and if you could comment on that.
Yes, that's a theory of Karen Starko, who was the lady who she was an EIS officer with me at CDC, who showed that aspirin was related to Rye syndrome. And when she was publishing that paper, she was in communication with me, and I told her again and again, no, I don't think so. But say it again. Yeah, no, I don't think so. I don't think that aspirin is related. But it's interesting. It's an interesting thing to think about, because this is the era in which aspirin was used all over the world. It had come from Bayer, and they had a monopoly on it. But even in India, they were using aspirin. So it's not a crazy idea. I just think the data don't support it.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So you said you think it's not coming, the next pandemic isn't going to be coming from chickens. What keeps you up at night?
Yeah. Well, what keeps me up at night is, if you think about it, the next big thing, the next big pandemic, the next big deadly disease is always, always the one you never could have possibly imagined. That's what keeps me up.
Mary?
Oh, thanks. That was just terrific. I wondered if you could say a few words about the impact on some of the more remote populations, like Native Americans and those who were in the urban areas, for example, and how they were impacted or spared.
Well, so Native peoples and people in remote areas, there were a lot of remote areas that entirely escaped the pandemic and never got influenza for decades. But there were other remote areas, such as villages in Alaska, where the mortality was almost 100%. And so, it's very hard to make a rule of thumb from that. But I think I would say that, we don't know why, for example, Alaskan villages had 80 or even higher % mortality, but it probably had to do with nutrition. and it probably had to do with lack of good medical care and lack of medicines and bacterial, and Alaskans are high carriers of streptococci and other bacteria. But it's just, we remember that with measles, for example, which is a different disease, but also measles pneumonia, you also die the same way from influenza pneumonia. You get a viral pneumonia and then the bacteria kick in. With measles, even incipient low vitamin A can increase your risk of severe disease and death. So I speculate that probably something like that's going on with flu in vitamin A, in areas with vitamin A that are vitamin A deficient. That's much of the tropical area, not so much, up in Alaska, I don't think, even with diets of 1918. And then in the inner cities, the death rates in the inner cities in the United States were not that much farther above the death rates of well-to-do people in the same cities.
I think we have time for one more question.
Thank you for a very nice lecture, and thank you for those kind words about the NIH library.
You're welcome, Josh.
Could you comment on perhaps any connections with the 1918 flu in Kenyon, and of course the formation of the NIH itself?
Well, of course, Joe Kenyon, who is the founder of the Hygienic Laboratory, which became NIAID, and Hygienic Lab also became NIH. So we're NIH, NIAID. Was alive and working in the Hygienic Lab in 1889 at the time of the previous pandemic. And they did do some work on it, as did the Public Health Service. But Kenyon himself didn't do a lot of work on influenza. He was involved in it, but not to a great extent. But during the 1918 pandemic, other public health service, Kenyon had retired by then and actually died in 1919 during the flu pandemic. But by that time, other public health service officers were working on flu, and they did an awful lot of good work.
So, David, just for another congratulations. This is a fantastic lecture, but I want the audience, I think, couldn't help but see when David prepares something, he really prepares it. They maybe noticed that maybe 250 additional slides were shown while you were answering the question. They didn't fall out of the sky. He made them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you.